Thursday afternoon, West Bloomfield, Michigan. Inside a Jewish preschool, 140 children are finishing lunch. Some are still learning how to tie their shoes. Some are barely old enough to speak in full sentences. Down the hallway, a teacher is stacking tiny chairs after nap time. Outside in the parking lot, a truck turns the corner. It doesn't slow down. Security cameras capture it accelerating toward the building. Inside the truck is a man who has just told his ex-wife to take care of their children. And in less than 30 seconds, that truck will crash into the hallway of the school. If security had been 5 seconds slower, this story would be about the deadliest attack on a Jewish school in American history. But it isn't. And to understand why, we have to go back to another synagogue, another morning, another man who decided the world needed enemies. 6 years earlier, October 2025, Manchester, England. It is Yom Kippur, the holiest morning of the Jewish year, a day of fasting and prayer. Families arriving in their best clothes, an elderly man greeting his neighbors at the gate, a rabbi unlocking the doors of a synagogue his community has worshipped in for generations. It will be the last ordinary morning some of them ever know. And further back still, October 2018, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. A city of bridges, a neighborhood called Squirrel Hill, close-knit, safe, beloved. A Saturday morning like hundreds of Saturdays before it. 3 congregations gathering under one roof for Shabbat services. 11 of them will not walk back out. 3 synagogues, 3 attacks, separated by years, by oceans, by ideology, yet connected by something investigators, psychologists, and communities are still trying to fully understand. Tonight, we trace those connections. We sit inside 3 of the worst days in recent Jewish history, and we ask the question that no politician, no security briefing, and no memorial service has yet been able to answer. Why does this keep happening? And what were we missing? To understand what happened at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, you first have to understand Squirrel Hill. It is one of those American neighborhoods that feels like it was designed by a novelist. Leafy streets, a walkable main strip, delis and bookstores and coffee shops that have been in the same families for 40 years. An overwhelming sense that this is a place where people know each other, where community is not just a word, but a daily practice. Squirrel Hill has been the heart of Pittsburgh's Jewish community since the early 20th century. Generations of families built their lives here. They raised children here. They buried parents here. And they worshipped here, in synagogues that were as much a part of the neighborhood as the streets themselves. The Tree of Life Synagogue at the corner of Wilkins and Shady Avenue was a grand mid-century building, stone facade, arched windows, the kind of architecture that says permanence, that says we are not going anywhere. On the morning of October 27, 2018, 3 separate congregations shared the building for Shabbat morning services. Tree of Life, Dor Hadash, and New Light, each with their own traditions, their own histories, their own regulars who had been coming through those doors for decades. Among them, Sylvan Simon, 86, and his wife Bernice, 84. The couple had married a Tree of Life in 1956. They had worshipped there every Shabbat since. Neighbors said they held hands in the pews, that they always smiled. Among them, Cecil and David Rosenthal, brothers, both in their 50s, both beloved by the community. They lived together in a supported residential home for people with disabilities. Every week, without fail, they were a Tree of Life before most people had even left the house. Cecil would hand out prayer books. David would greet people at the door. Among them, Joyce Feinberg, 75, a retired researcher from the University of Pittsburgh. Richard Godfried, 65, a dentist who offered free dental care to low-income patients and refugees. Irving Younger, 69, who friends said laughed with his whole body. 11 people, in a building they trusted, on a morning they had lived hundreds of times before. None of them could have known that this particular morning had already been decided. 2,000 miles away and 7 years later, a different community was preparing for a different kind of morning. Crumpsall is a suburb in Greater Manchester, quiet, residential, unremarkable in the best way possible. The Heaton Park Hebrew congregation sits at the edge of the neighborhood. A modest building, no grand architecture, just a place where a tight community has worshipped for years. October 2nd, 2025 was Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the holiest day of the Jewish year. A day of fasting and prayer. Families arriving in their best clothes, an elderly man greeting his neighbors at the gate, a rabbi unlocking the doors of a synagogue his community has worshipped in for generations. It will be the last ordinary morning some of them ever know. And further back still, West Bloomfield, Michigan, March 2026. Temple Israel is not a small community synagogue. It is one of the largest Reform Jewish congregations in the entire United States, 12,000 members strong. The campus is sprawling. There's a sanctuary, a school, offices, gathering spaces, and at the center of the campus, the Susan and Harold Loss Early Childhood Center. On any given weekday, that center is full of children. On March 12, 2026, there were 140 of them. Their parents had dropped them off that morning the same way they always did, kissed them goodbye in the parking lot, watched them walk through the doors, and driven off to work, trusting, as parents do, that the world would hold steady for a few hours. 6 weeks earlier, the FBI had conducted an active shooter preparedness training at Temple Israel. Staff had drilled, security had reviewed protocols. It had felt at the time like routine preparation, the kind of thing institutions do now in an era when no place feels entirely safe. Nobody predicted how soon it would matter. At 12:53 p.m. on a Thursday in March, a truck turned into the Temple Israel parking lot. It did not slow down. Robert Bowers was 46 years old, a commercial truck driver living in Baldwin, a suburb south of Pittsburgh. By all outward appearances, he was unremarkable. No prior criminal record, no public profile, no history that raised flags among his neighbors. But online, Bowers had constructed an entire inner world, and it was rotting from the inside. On Gab, an alternative social media platform marketed to users who had been removed from mainstream networks, Bowers posted constantly. He had been building towards something for months, maybe years. His posts were saturated with antisemitic conspiracy theories, the belief that Jewish people were orchestrating the demographic replacement of white Americans, that Jewish organizations were, in his words, flooding the country with enemies. His primary fixation was HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, one of the oldest refugee resettlement organizations in the world. Founded in the 1880s to help Jewish immigrants fleeing persecution in Eastern Europe, IAS had long since expanded its mission to help refugees of all backgrounds. To Bowers, this was not compassion, it was a coordinated invasion. In the week before the shooting, the congregation of Dor Hadash, one of the 3 groups sharing the Tree of Life building, had participated in IAS's National Refugee Shabbat, a global event encouraging Jewish communities to reflect on their tradition of welcoming strangers. Bowers saw their participation. He posted about it. He wrote that IAS liked to bring in invaders that kill our people. And then, on the morning of October 27th, he loaded 4 weapons, an AR-15 and 3 handguns into his vehicle, and he drove to Squirrel Hill. Years later, at trial, his defense attorneys would present a different portrait. They argued that Bowers suffered from schizophrenia and epilepsy, that his beliefs were not the product of hatred, but of severe, untreated mental illness, that he lived inside a delusional framework that had become indistinguishable from reality. The prosecution rejected this entirely. They argued he was a man who knew exactly what he was doing and who felt justified, maybe even proud. The jury agreed with the prosecution.
Jihad al-Shamie was 35 years old, a British citizen of Syrian descent, living in the Manchester area. Neighbors described him as quiet, someone who kept to himself, someone you might not notice. But investigators, piecing together his movements in the months before October 2025, believe his radicalization had been building quietly and rapidly. The exact timeline of that process, who he communicated with, what material he consumed, whether he was directed or self-inspired, remains a subject of active inquiry. What investigators know is this. On the morning of Yom Kippur, al-Shamie arrived at the Heaton Park Synagogue on foot. He lingered. He watched. He was noticed and told to leave, and he did, without confrontation. He walked home. He got into his car. As his vehicle accelerated toward the synagogue, he called 999, the British Emergency Services line. And on that call, in the final seconds before impact, he pledged allegiance to Islamic State. The targeting of Yom Kippur was deliberate and calculated. This was the one morning of the year when Jewish congregants would be gathered in the largest numbers, fasting, without their phones in many cases, engaged entirely in prayer. It was a morning designed around vulnerability. The attack was designed around that vulnerability too. Ayman Ghazali was 41 years old. He was a Lebanese-born American citizen living in Dearborn Heights, a suburb of Detroit with a large Arab-American community. He had worked, he had a family, he had, by most accounts, a life. And then, approximately 10 days before March 12, 2026, that life was shattered. An Israeli airstrike struck a village in Lebanon where Ghazali's family lived. 2 of his brothers were killed. 2 of their children, his nieces or nephews, were killed alongside them. A sister-in-law was severely injured and hospitalized. In the days that followed, people who knew Ghazali said he became unrecognizable. He stopped going to work. He withdrew. He spent long stretches alone. Those who saw him described a man swallowed by grief, someone who had gone somewhere inside himself and could not find the way back. In the hours before the attack, he called his ex-wife. He told her to take care of their children. She knew something was wrong. She could not stop it. What investigators are still working to determine, and may never fully resolve, is the precise architecture of what drove him to Temple Israel. Was this an ideological violence against a Jewish institution? Was it the unhinged expression of grief that had nowhere to go? Was it both, layered together in ways that resist clean categorization? That question matters. It matters for how we understand radicalization. It matters for how we build early intervention systems. It matters for whether we can ever get ahead of attacks like this, or whether we will always be one step behind. But for 140 children on a March afternoon in West Bloomfield, the truck was already in the parking lot.
Pittsburgh, Saturday, October 27, 2018. The Tree of Life Synagogue is filled with the sound of prayer. The morning service has been underway for nearly an hour. Congregants stand and sit in the rhythm that Jewish worshippers have followed for thousands of years. It is quiet in the way that only a sanctuary full of people at prayer can be. A communal silence, purposeful, warm. At 9:54 a.m., the sound of gunfire. Robert Bowers entered through the main doors carrying his AR-15 and shouting anti-Semitic slurs. He moved through the building systematically. 4 people killed on the ground floor, 4 more in the upstairs chapel, 3 in the basement, where a third congregation had gathered in a smaller space. Allegheny County 911 received the first call at 9:55. Within 2 minutes, patrol units were on scene. Officers exchanged gunfire with Bowers on multiple occasions as he moved through the building. He was wounded. Several officers were wounded, but Bowers kept firing. By the time it was over, 75 rounds had been discharged from his rifle alone. 11 people were dead. The oldest victim was Rose Mallinger, 97 years old, a devoted member of Tree of Life, who had been attending services at this synagogue for decades. The youngest was 54. David and Cecil Rosenthal, the brothers who handed out prayer books, who greeted everyone at the door, were both killed. They died together, in the place they had spent every Shabbat of their adult lives. Sylvan and Bernice Simon, the couple who had married at Tree of Life 62 years before, both died that morning, together as they had lived. In the hours and days that followed, Pittsburgh tried to absorb something that felt unabsorbable. Vigils stretched for blocks. The mayor wept in public. The president visited and was met with protesters in the streets who said he was not welcome. The community of Squirrel Hill, Jewish and non-Jewish, came together in ways that were both beautiful and heartbreaking. And the Tree of Life Synagogue closed its doors. It has not reopened as a place of worship since. Manchester, Thursday, October 2nd, 2025. Yom Kippur services at Heaton Park Hebrew Congregation have been underway since early morning. The congregation is large today. This is the one service of the year that brings everyone out, even those who rarely attend. Families fill the rows. The rabbi leads the congregation through the ancient liturgy. Outside, the street is quiet, residential, a few cars parked along the curb. At 9:26 a.m., a vehicle appears on a doorbell camera at the end of the block. It is moving fast. At 9:30 a.m., al-Shamie's car strikes a security guard stationed near the entrance. The vehicle crashes through the metal gate at the perimeter. The impact is violent enough to be heard inside the building. Al-Shamie exits the vehicle immediately. He has a knife. He moves toward the people standing near the entrance, those who had not yet made it inside or who were standing in the courtyard. Melvin Kravitz, 66, is the first person attacked. He is struck multiple times. The wounds are catastrophic. Inside the synagogue, Rabbi Daniel Walker hears the commotion. He has no time to think, only to act. He shouts for the congregation to move. He locks the doors. He pushes people toward the interior of the building, away from the entrance, away from the sound. The locked doors hold. Outside, several men, worshippers who had not made it inside, positioned themselves at the entrance. One of them is Adrian Dalby, 53. He plants himself against the doors, using his body as a barrier. Police arrive within minutes. Officers engage al-Shamie in the courtyard. They open fire. In the chaos, a police bullet strikes Adrian Dalby. He dies at the scene. 2 men are dead. Melvin Kravitz, who was simply standing outside his synagogue on the holiest morning of his year, and Adrian Dalby, who ran towards the danger to protect others and paid for that courage with his life. The attacker is dead. The synagogue is locked. Inside, hundreds of worshippers are pressed together in silence, fasting, trembling, alive. West Bloomfield, Michigan, Thursday, March 12, 2026. The Early Childhood Center at Temple Israel is in the middle of a normal afternoon. Lunch has wrapped up. Some of the youngest children are waking from naps. Teachers are moving through hallways with the practiced, gentle efficiency of people who spend their days caring for very small human beings.
At 12:53 p.m., a truck enters the parking lot. Security staff notice it immediately. The vehicle is not slowing. It moves with what the sheriff later described as unmistakable purpose, accelerating toward the building rather than parking. Armed security officers respond. They open fire on the vehicle. The truck crashes through a set of exterior doors and into a hallway inside the building. The collision knocks a security guard unconscious, and then something inside the vehicle ignites. The truck catches fire in the hallway. The driver, Ayman Ghazali, is struck by gunfire and killed inside the burning vehicle. Inside the early childhood center, teachers have already moved. The moment the first shot was fired in the parking lot, staff initiated lockdown procedures. Children were guided quickly and quietly away from windows and doors into interior spaces. Teachers positioned themselves between the children and any possible point of entry. The drills they had run 6 weeks earlier were not hypothetical anymore. 140 children, not one of them physically harmed. 30 first responders were treated for smoke inhalation. 1 security officer was hospitalized with injuries from the collision. Ayman Ghazali was pronounced dead on the scene. In the parking lot, parents began arriving, some who had received emergency alerts, some who had heard sirens, some who had gotten a text from the school that simply said, "Your child is safe." A mother named Allison Jacobs read that text before she even knew there had been an attack. She collapsed anyway, because even a text that says safe cannot fully undo the moment when you realize what almost happened.
In the days after Pittsburgh, the word unprecedented was used constantly. The worst anti-Semitic attack in American history. A city in mourning, a community in shock. And yet, the shock faded. The news cycle moved on. The Tree of Life Synagogue sat locked and silent, its future debated for years, while the families of 11 victims tried to figure out how to live in the aftermath of something with no clean ending. Robert Bowers went to trial in 2023. He was convicted on all 63 criminal counts brought against him. He was sentenced to death. His attorney's arguments about his mental illness did not sway the jury or the judge. The U.S. attorney who prosecuted the case said in his closing statement that Bowers had turned an ordinary Jewish Sabbath into a crime scene and had expressed no remorse. That he believed, even at trial, that what he had done was necessary. That is perhaps the most chilling part of the entire Pittsburgh story. Not that a man committed mass murder, but that he sat in a courtroom years later and did not think he was wrong. In Manchester, the aftermath opened into something even more complex and unsettling. The attack on Yom Kippur 2025 was immediately recognized as the worst anti-Semitic attack in modern British history. Prime Minister Keir Starmer cut short an overseas trip and flew home to chair an emergency security meeting. Extra police were deployed to synagogues and Jewish community centers across the country. But the story did not end there. The Community Security Trust, which monitors anti-Semitism in the UK, reported that the years leading up to the attack had seen an extraordinary escalation. Over 3,500 anti-Semitic incidents in 2024 alone. By mid-2025, the first 6 months of that year ranked as the second highest period of recorded anti-Semitic incidents in British history. And then investigators uncovered something that reframed everything. Within months of the Yom Kippur attack, 3 men were arrested and convicted in connection with a completely separate ISIS-linked plot, a foiled plan to carry out a mass casualty gun attack on Manchester's Jewish community. This plot had involved automatic weapons, surveillance of Jewish schools and synagogues in the city, a detailed operational plan that police described as potentially catastrophic in scale. 2 different attacks, 2 different groups of perpetrators, the same city, the same community, the same period of time. The question that investigators and community leaders were left with was deeply uncomfortable.
Had they been seeing isolated incidents or early tremors of something coordinated, something larger? That question has not been fully answered. In West Bloomfield, the community came together the way communities do in the immediate aftermath of violence, with shock, with grief, with gratitude that the outcome had not been worse. And then came the harder, slower reckoning. The FBI confirmed quickly that the attack on Temple Israel was a targeted act of violence against the Jewish community. That framing was clear, but the motive, the full, precise architecture of what drove Ayman Ghazali to that parking lot on that Thursday remained and continues to remain under investigation. The CEO of the Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Detroit stood at a press conference that afternoon. He had been doing this work for years. He had watched the Pittsburgh shooting. He had watched Manchester. He had watched synagogue after synagogue implement security systems, run drills, hire armed guards, install barriers. He said, "I'd love to say I'm shocked, I'm surprised, but I'm not." 6 words, and somehow they said more than hours of commentary. Because that is the thing that sits underneath all 3 of these stories. The thing that connects Pittsburgh in 2018 to Manchester in 2025 to West Bloomfield in 2026. It is not just the violence, it is the exhaustion, the fatigue of a community that has been forced to treat their houses of prayer like fortresses, that has been running active shooter drills in the same rooms where their children learn to read Hebrew, that sends their elderly parents to Shabbat services knowing that a security guard with a gun is standing outside, because without that guard, they can't be sure their parents will come home. Rabbi Jeffrey Myers survived the Pittsburgh shooting. He was inside Tree of Life on October 27, 2018. He has spoken publicly in the years since about grief, about resilience, about the impossible work of leading a congregation through trauma. After the Michigan attack, he said, "We lose our humanity when we seek violent means as a solution. No one should dwell in fear because of who they are." He said that in 2026. He had said the same thing, nearly the same words, in 2018. That is the thread that runs through all 3 of these stories. Not the violence itself, but the fact that one man had had to give the same statement twice. That one community has been through this before and knows, with a certainty that should alarm all of us, that they may go through it again. 3 synagogues, 11 dead in Pittsburgh, 2 dead in Manchester, none dead in West Bloomfield. A miracle of preparation, of training, of armed security doing exactly what they had rehearsed. But a miracle is not a solution. And the question that opened this documentary, why does this keep happening, and what were we missing, does not have a clean answer tonight. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the discomfort of sitting with that unanswered question is the only honest place to end. Because the people in those 3 buildings, the ones who survived and the ones who didn't, they deserve better than a documentary that ties it all in a bow. They deserve us to keep asking. These 3 attacks made global headlines. But they weren't the only times investigators found themselves staring at a trail of warning signs they hadn't acted on in time. There is another case, different city, different motive, different community, where investigators later admitted they had everything they needed to stop it, and they didn't.